Jax and Jack Morgan stood at the kitchen counter with a steaming mug of coffee in his hand and a smile on his face. The Atlanta morning sun streamed through the window, catching the sparkle of Alyssa's engagement ring as she moved about the kitchen. Alyssa was moving about the kitchen, and Jack said, his voice excited, "I can't believe it's almost there." She smiled, but her eyes didn't quite reach her smile. Jax didn't notice the slight tension in her posture as he gulped. Jack finished his coffee and started thinking about the day ahead. He had a big project at work and last-minute wedding preparations to get through. He said goodbye to Alyssa and left for work. He got through the morning traffic. His phone buzzed with a text from his younger brother Derek. "Hey bro, we still on for lunch?" Jack sighed. Derek always needed something, but he was family, and Jax felt that familiar pull of responsibility. He texted back, "The usual place at 12. By 30, the morning had flown by in a flurry of meetings and phone calls. Jax was sliding into a booth across from Derek at their favorite diner. Derek began flashing his trademark charismatic grin. "How's the wedding planning going?" Jax couldn't help but smile. "It's going well, but busy. Alyssa's got most of it under control, which is great," Derek replied, his eyes darting to his phone. "Listen, I hate to ask, but I'm in a bit of a bind." And there it was. Jax felt his shoulders tense as Derek launched into a convoluted story about a missed sales. "And there's the possibility of eviction. Money is always at the heart of it with Derek." "How much did you ask for, Jax?" "I asked for as much as I could get, until my next commission check comes in." Jax rubbed his temples, feeling a headache coming on. "You're 30 years old. When are you going to get your act together?" I know. I'm working on it. This is the last time. I promise." Jax had heard that promise before, but he found himself reaching for his checkbook anyway. Family was family after all. As he wrote out the check, Jax missed the flash of guilt that crossed Derek's face. The next few weeks passed in a blur of work and wedding preparations. Before he knew it, the night of their engagement party had arrived. The backyard of their parents' suburban home was transformed, with twinkling lights, strong between trees, and the smell of barbecue filling the air. Jack stood near the makeshift bar watching as Alyssa mingled with guests. "She's quite a catch," his father Roy said, clapping him on the shoulder. "You did good, son," Jack smiled, feeling a swell of pride. In his chest he felt a rush of gratitude. His mother Carla came over and gave him a tight hug. "My baby boy, all grown up and getting married," she said. Jax protested, but there was no real annoyance in his tone. He loved his parents, even if they could be a bit overbearing at times. As the night went on, the party filled with laughter and congratulations. The night wore on. Derek clinked his glass and called for everyone's attention. "If I could have a moment," he said, his voice carrying across the yard. "I'd like to say a few words about my big brother and his beautiful." Jax felt Alyssa tense beside him as Derek began to speak, but he was too caught up in the moment to notice. "He'd always been there for me," Derek continued, "through thick and thin. He's had my back, and now he's found someone who complements him perfectly." He raised his glass towards Alyssa and Jax. "To Alyssa and Jax, may your love only grow stronger with each passing day." The guests cheered, and Jax pulled Derek into a fierce hug. "Thanks, little brother," he whispered as they embraced. Jax missed the quick glance that passed between Derek and Alyssa. The days that followed were a whirlwind of final wedding preparations, with Derek and Alyssa passing the time between Derek and Jax. Jax threw himself into his work, eager to wrap up a big project before taking time off on his honeymoon. It was late on one night, nearly midnight, when Jax's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. He got a message from an unknown number. He was curious, so he opened it. His world came crashing down. There on the screen were photos, and a video of Alyssa and Derek tangled together in various states of undress. The timestamp showed they were recent, some from just days ago. Jax felt like he was going to. He felt sick. His hands shook as he scrolled through the images, each one making his heart break a little more. He didn't sleep that night, his mind racing with questions and accusations. When morning came, he was waiting in the kitchen when Alyssa emerged, bleary-eyed and yawning. "We need to talk," Jack said, his voice cold and flat. Alyssa froze, sensing the change in his demeanor. "What's wrong?" he continued without a word. Jack slid his phone across the counter, and Alyssa's face drained of color as she saw what was on the screen. "Jax, I can explain," she began, but he cut her off. Jack started to explain, but he was interrupted by Alyssa, who pleaded, "It's not what it looks like." She was crying, and her eyes were filled with tears. "Those photos must be fake," she said. "Someone's trying to break us up." Jax laughed, but it was a harsh, bitter sound. "Don't," he said. "Insult my intelligence, Alyssa. I know what I'm looking at." The argument that followed was explosive, with accusations flying back and forth and voices raised until they were both exhausted. Finally, Alyssa crumpled, sinking to the floor as sobs racked her body. She whispered, "I'm sorry," and began to cry. Jack stood over her, his anger giving way to a deep, aching pain. He asked, his voice barely audible, how long it had been. Alyssa looked up, her makeup streaked down her face. She admitted that the confession hit Jax like a physical blow. It had been half a year, 6 months of lies and betrayal. "There's more," Alyssa said, her voice trembling. "I'm pregnant." Jax felt the room spin. He gripped the counter to steady himself. "Is it mine?" he asked, already knowing the answer. Alyssa shook her head. "I don't know," she whispered. "It could be yours or Derek's." He felt something inside him break. The future he had imagined crumbled to dust. "Get out," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Pack your things and get out of my house." Alyssa tried to reach for him, but he recoiled from her touch. "Jax, we're done," he said. There was a finality to his tone as he said, "The wedding is off. I never want to see you again." Alyssa retreated to the bedroom and started sobbing. Jax's thoughts turned to Derek, his own brother. The betrayal cut deep, leaving a wound he wasn't sure would ever heal. He dialed his parents with shaking hands. When his mother answered, he could barely get the words out. "Mom, I need to talk to Dad. It's about Derek." An hour later, Jack stood in his parents' living room pacing like a caged animal. When the front door opened and Derek Syed came in, Jack saw red. Emergency Dirk's words were cut off as Jax's fist connected with his jaw. "You son of a Jax," growled, grabbing Derek by the shirt and slamming him against the wall. "I can't blame myself for this. Alyssa came on to me and said she needed a real man." The taunt pushed Jax over the edge. He started hitting Derek's face and body. "She's carrying your child," he roared. "My future." It took both Royce and Carla to pull Jax off his brother. Derek slumped to the floor, his face a mess of blood and forming bruises. The floor. His face a mess of blood and forming bruises. "Boys, stop this," Carla cried, her voice shrill with panic. "We're family," Royce stepped between his sons, his face a mask of confusion. "What in God's name is going on here?" Through gasps and sobs, the story came out. Carla collapsed onto the couch. While Royce stood there, looking like he couldn't believe what he was seeing, Jax finally spoke. His voice was heavy with disappointment. "We need to sit down and talk this through as a family." Jax stared at his father in disbelief. "Talk it through. Are you serious?" "Your brother made a mistake," Carla interjected, her voice pleading. "He's still family. We can work this out." Jax looked from his mother to his father, then to Derek, who was being tended to by Carla. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. They were going to forgive Derek again, just like they always did, Jax said, his voice cold and final. "This time he's not my brother anymore. If you choose to side with him, then I don't have parents either." He turned and walked out of the house, ignoring his mother's cries and his father's calls to come. As he got into his car, he felt a new emotion rising within him. It was a feeling of pure, unadulterated rage, pushing past the pain and betrayal. He drove away from his childhood home, his mind racing. Who had sent those photos and video? Why now, just weeks before the wedding? What was he going to do about it? One thing was certain, Derek and Alyssa were going to pay for what they'd done, and whoever had exposed their affair. Well, Jax wasn't sure if he wanted to thank them or destroy them too. Either way, he was going to find out who it was. Then, he'd get his revenge. The North Carolina mountains were in Jax's rearview mirror, as he drove into the small town he now called home. It had been 3 months since he'd left Atlanta. 3 months since his life had imploded. The rage that had driven him here had cooled to a simmering anger. Jack still felt simmering anger, which drove him to make every move. He pulled into the driveway of the modest cabin he rented. As he stepped out of the car, his phone buzzed with another missed call from his mother. He ignored it, just as he had ignored the dozens before it. Inside, Jax booted up his laptop and opened his work emails. The remote engineering contracts he'd taken on provided a steady income and, more importantly, solitude. He didn't have to deal with office politics, small talk, or reminders of his old life. As he was checking his emails, he saw a new one from Derek Morgan. The subject was confidential information. Jax's heart started racing as he opened it. It had lots of details about Derek's work, including some suspiciously inflated deals. The sender was anonymous, but the message was clear. This was ammunition. Jax smiled coldly to himself. "Got you, little brother," he muttered. Over the next few days, he went through the information, verifying it. He was pretty sure it was genuine, so he set up an anonymous email account and sent a message to Derek's company's HR department and board of directors. He was just about to hit send when he suddenly stopped. Was he really going to do this and destroy his brother's career? He remembered Derek's smug face taunting him about Alyssa, and he knew he couldn't go through with it. The fallout was swift and devastating. Within a week, Jax heard from old contacts that Derek had been fired. His reputation was in tatters. Jax allowed himself a moment of satisfaction, but it was fleeting. This was just the beginning. As the weeks passed, Jackson focused on the question that had nagged at him since that fateful night. Who had sent him those photos and video? He began to obsess over it, spending hours each night going through old contacts, cross-referencing numbers, and reaching out to former friends for any leads. One evening, as Jax was poring over his notes, a name jumped out at him. Maya Thompson, Derek's ex-girlfriend, the one he'd broken up with years ago to be with Alyssa. Could it be Jax? He found her contact info and, after a moment's hesitation, sent her a text. "Maya, it's Jax Morgan. I know it's been a while, but I was hoping we could meet for coffee. There's something I'd like to discuss." To his surprise, Maya responded almost immediately. The next day, Jax found himself sitting across from Maya at the Bluebird Cafe. She looked much the same as he remembered. Dark hair, piercing eyes, and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Maya," he said, stirring his latte. "What's up?" Maya's eyes widened. "You're here in Atlanta?" Jax's jaw clenched. "I heard you were getting married." Maya's eyebrow arched. "Oh, do tell." Jax studied her face, looking for any sign that she might already know the story. "It's a long, ugly tale," he said. Jax said, "I'd rather hear what you've been up to since I last saw you." Maya nodded. "I've just been promoted to the executive level." She paused, a smile playing on her lips. "I heard about Derek's troubles. Such a shame." She said it in such a casual way. Jax's mind immediately started racing. He leaned forward and asked, "Maya, I have to ask, did you have anything to do with what happened?" Maya's smile widened, but she didn't answer directly. Instead, she said, "You know, Jax, there's an old saying, what goes around comes around. Derek made a lot of enemies over the years. It was only a matter of time before it caught up with him." Jax felt a chill run down his spine. He could see in Maya's eyes that she knew more than she was letting on, but before he could press further, she changed the subject and steered the conversation to safer topics as they parted ways. Jax's mind was still full of her words as he returned to his cabin. He was more convinced than ever that she was involved somehow, but he needed proof. He glanced at the screen, his thumb hovering over the decline button. After a moment's hesitation, he answered, "What do you want, Alyssa?" He said, his voice cold. "Jax, please." Alyssa's voice was desperate. "I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I need your help." Jax laughed. Alyssa pleaded, "I'm in my 3rd trimester now, and Derek has completely abandoned me. I have nowhere else to turn." Jax felt a mix of emotions, anger, pity, and a small unwelcome concern. "What about the baby?" he asked. Jax asked, even though he didn't want to hear it. That's why I'm calling Elisa, she said, her voice breaking. Jax, there's a chance the baby could be yours. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm begging you. We could take a paternity test if it's your child. Don't you want to know? Jax was blown away by the idea that the kid could be his. He'd been so wrapped up in his anger and plans for revenge that he'd pushed all thoughts of the pregnancy aside. I need to think about this, he said finally. I'll call you back. He hung up. His head was spinning as he tried to process this new development. Another piece of information reached him through his network of contacts. Drick had moved in with a wealthy socialite, a woman he met through his former job. He was already living off her money and showing no sign of taking responsibility for Elisa or the baby. The news reignited Jax's anger. Derek was still the same selfish, irresponsible person he'd always been, but now Jax had a new target for his revenge. Over the next few days, Jax gathered information on Derek's. He found out that Nom Vivian Carroll lived in an upscale Atlanta neighborhood. This gave him an idea. He picked up his phone and called Derek. It went to voicemail. Derek, it's Jack. I just wanted to give you a call. His voice was calm and conciliatory. I know things have been difficult between us, but you're still my brother. I think it's time we talk and try to work things out. Give me a call when you get this. He hung up, a grim smile on his face. The bait was set. Now he just had to wait for Derek to bite. Wait for Derek to bite. It didn't take long. The next day, Jax's phone rang. Derek's name flashed on the screen. Hey, big brother. Derek's voice was cautious. I got your message. Are you serious about talking? Jax swallowed his disgust. Yeah, I am. I've had some time to think things over. We're family, right? Why don't we meet up, have a drink, and try to sort this mess out? That sounds great, Jax. Really great. When and where? How about next Friday? There's a bar downtown called the Rusty Nail. Say 8. 8 in the evening. p.m. I'll be there, Derek said quickly. Thanks for reaching out. It means a lot. As Jax ended the call, he felt a twinge of regret and guilt. He pushed it aside. Derek had made his choices, and now he had to live with the consequences. The week leading up to the meeting dragged on. Jax spent his days working and his nights planning. He reached out to several of Derek's old colleagues and friends, casually mentioning that he and Derek would be at the Rusty Nail on Friday night, trying to patch things up. He knew word would spread. Finally, Friday night arrived. Jax arrived at the bar early, securing a table with a clear view of the entrance. He nursed a whiskey, his stomach churning with a mix of anticipation and dread. At 8 p.m., he excused himself to go to the bathroom. Old colleagues and family friends said they'd be at the Rusty Nail on Friday night, trying to patch things up. He knew word would spread. Finally, Friday night arrived. Jax arrived at the bar early, got a table with a clear view of the entrance, and had a whiskey. He felt a mix of anticipation and dread. It was 8:05. Derek walked in. He looked thinner, Jax noticed, and there were dark circles under his eyes for a moment. Jax felt a flicker of the old brotherly concern. Then he remembered why they were here, and his resolve hardened. Derek and Jax said hello to each other, sitting down across from each other at the table. He said he wasn't ready to talk yet, and asked the bartender for another round. Derek said, looking at his napkin, that he wasn't sure how to start. Jax took a deep breath and began, "We both know why we're here." Derek's face fell. "Jax, I know I messed up badly, but I want to make things right. What can I do to fix this?" Jax laughed, a harsh, bitter laugh. "You think you can fix this? You think you can just make everything better?" His voice rose, drawing the attention of nearby patrons. "You slept with my fiancée. You got her pregnant. You destroyed my life. And for what? A cheap thrill?" Derek's eyes widened as he realized this wasn't the reconciliation he'd hoped for. "Jax, please keep your down." But Jax was just he started by listing all the ways Derek had let him down. As he spoke, he noticed familiar faces entering the bar. Derek's former colleagues, family, and friends, just as he'd planned. Then Jax said, his voice dripping with contempt. "You're shacked up with some rich woman mooching off her money while Alyssa. Struggling alone with your child. Derek? You're pathetic. You always have been." Derek stood up, his face red with shame and anger. "You set me up. You never wanted to make peace, you just wanted to humiliate me." "No, Derek," Jax said calmly. "You humiliated yourself. I'm just making sure everyone knows who you really are." As Derek stormed out, Jack saw the shocked and disgusted looks on the faces of the onlookers as he left the bar. He knew that by morning, Derek's reputation would be in tatters once again. The next day, Jax met Maya for coffee. This time, he was direct. "It was you, wasn't it?" he said. "You sent me those photos and videos of Derek and Alyssa." Ma didn't deny it. Instead, she smiled a cold, satisfied expression. "Derek ruined my life when he left me for Alyssa," she said. "I've been waiting years for the right moment to return the favor. When I found out about their affair, I knew it was time." Jax felt a strange mix of gratitude and unease. "Why didn't you tell me it was you before?" Maya just gave a shrug. "I wanted to see what you do with the information I have to say. I'm impressed you've dismantled Derek's life quite thoroughly." As they talked, Jax realized that he and Maya shared a common goal. Seeing Derek pay for his actions was a cold comfort, but a comfort nonetheless. The weeks that followed were a blur. Jax received the paternity test results. The baby wasn't his. He cut all ties with Alyssa, blocking her number and email. He was unemployed and newly single. Vivian was out of work too. After finding out the full story, it seemed like she was moving on from him. Jax threw himself into his work, taking on more challenging projects. He moved to a larger apartment in the city and started rebuilding his life on his own terms. One evening, as he stood in his new office looking out over the city skyline, Jax felt something he hadn't experienced in months. The anger that had driven him for so long was still there, but it no longer consumed him. He thought about Derek and Alyssa, and the baby that would grow up in the middle of this mess. For a moment he felt regret for the scorched earth approach he'd taken, but then he remembered the betrayal, the lies, and the years of cleaning up Derek's messes. No, he decided, he'd done what needed to be done. He'd taken control of his life, refused to be a victim, and now, finally, he was free. As the sun set over the city, Jax smiled to himself. He had survived a betrayal. He came out of it stronger, and nobody would ever hurt him like that again. Jax stared at his phone, Derek's name glaring back at him from the screen. 6 months had passed since their confrontation at the Rusty Nail. 6 months of silence, broken only by whispers of Derek's continued downward spiral. Jax's jaw clenched as he hit the call button. Jax's voice crackled through the speaker, a mix of weariness and surprise. "We need to talk," Jax said. His tone was cold and flat. "In person tomorrow night at 8:10-15, the park near their old house." "Jax, I don't think he'll be there." Jax didn't return Derek's greeting. Instead, he fixed him with a hard stare. "Derek, I want to know why. Why Alyssa? Why destroy everything?" Derek flinched at the directness of the question. "Derek, I don't know." "Jax, it just happened." "Jax, I'm sorry. I know it doesn't change anything, but I am truly, deeply sorry." "Derek, you're right. It doesn't change a damn thing." Jax said he couldn't face it. He always ran away from his responsibilities. Jax and Derek asked him what they wanted from him. Jax said he'd lost everything, his job, his reputation, his family. He wanted Jax to suffer. He wanted Derek to wake up every day knowing that Jax had destroyed him. "The only people who ever truly cared about you. I want you to live with that guilt for the rest of your miserable life." Derek looked up, tears in his eyes. "Can't we move past this? We're still brothers." "No," Jax cut him off. "We're not. You're dead to me. Derek, this is the last time you'll ever see me. Don't try to contact me again." With that, Jax got up and walked away, leaving Derek alone on the bench. He felt no remorse, no pity, only a cold satisfaction that justice had been served. The next morning, Jax met Maya for coffee. She studied his face as he sat down. "How did it go with Derek?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. How did you know about that? Jax replied, raising an eyebrow in return. A small smile played on her lips. Jax leaned back, fixing her with a steady gaze. It's time for the truth. Maya, why did you really send me those photos and videos? Maya's smile faded. I love Dirk. When he left me for Alyssa, it broke me. I spent years putting myself back together, always, wondering what she had that I didn't. She paused. Her eyes hardened when I found out about their affair. I saw my chance for revenge. I knew if anyone could make Derek pay, it was you. You used me, Jack said, his voice void of emotion. Yes, Maya admitted. But can you honestly say you regret knowing the truth? Jax thought for a moment. No, he said finally. But don't think that makes us friends. You're just as manipulative as Derek. Maya nodded, accepting his judgment. Fair enough, she said. What will you do now? Move on. Jack said firmly, I will move on. I'm going to leave all of this behind. Over the next few weeks, Jax threw himself into his work with renewed intensity. He took on more challenging projects. He was taking on new challenges at work, and his colleagues noticed a change. They commented on his laser focus and increased productivity. One evening, as he was finishing up a complex design, his phone rang. It was an unknown number. Hello, Jax, it said. Jax's grip tightened on the phone. What do you want? He said. I wanted to let you know the baby was born. Last week, I named her Lily. Why are you telling me this? Jax asked, his voice cold because Alyssa said her voice was breaking even after everything. You deserve to know. And I'm sorry, Jax. I know it doesn't change anything, but I need you to know how sorry I am. You're right. Jax said, his tone unchanged. It doesn't change anything. Don't contact me again, Alyssa. Ever. He ended the call feeling nothing but a dull ache where his heart used to be. The next day, Jax made a decision. He accepted a job offer from a prestigious engineering firm in Seattle. It was time for a fresh start, far away from the ghosts of his past. On his last night in Atlanta, Jax stood in his empty apartment with a view of the city skyline, made him think about the past year. He'd been betrayed, angry, and vengeful. But he didn't regret it. The world had shown its true colors, and he'd adapted. His phone buzzed with a text from Maya. He heard you're leaving town. Jax typed out a response. No, goodbye, Maya. He hit send and powered off his phone as he locked the door to his apartment for the last time. Jax felt a grim satisfaction. He had survived the betrayal and emerged stronger. He walked out of the building and into the warm Atlanta night, ready to face whatever came next. The past is behind him, and the future is uncertain, but one thing is clear. Jax Morgan will never let anyone get close enough to hurt him again. He climbed into his car, casting one last look at the city that had been his home, the place where he had lost everything and found a new version of himself without a hint of remorse or nostalgia. He started the engine and drove away, leaving behind the ashes of his old life and the people who had burned it to the ground. Jax realized that forgiveness was overrated. It was the refusal to forget and the cold determination to move forward without looking back that truly set him free. He decided that was victory enough.